Hi, welcome back to the Mud Hub. This is episode 4. Sometimes I get asked questions that I can answer within a minute or two, and other times I get asked questions that I feel like I want to spend a whole month talking about, and that's happened to me this week. Thanks to the wonderful Debs on Instagram who has asked, how do I deal with imposter syndrome? What a question. And I've really had to spend time thinking about this and thinking about what I want to say, because this is something that so many of us come across, maybe even struggle with throughout different times and interacting with different crowds in our professional circle, be that working as a poet, a musician, an artist, a writer, an editor, a reviewer, whatever. All of us, regardless of our profession, experience imposter syndrome from time to time. So let me say, I personally think that imposter syndrome is super healthy. Thank the Lord above that the majority of us experience this imposter syndrome, because you know what? It keeps you humble. We've all met that person at the party that swags in, takes their seat at the table, knows exactly what they want to say, regardless of what the person in front of them's just said. And I think imposter syndrome gives us a little bit of humility and also allows us to check in on our progress. Although imposter syndrome seems like this bad thing and something we should have to tackle, I don't think that's 100% true. However, imposter syndrome can be debilitating, and I was really fortunate for the first 5 or so years of my career in the poetry circle, because I started poetry before I even went to university. I joined a spoken word collective called the Mouthy Poets, and they were an incredible bunch to step into. They were welcoming, you learnt on the job, and there was always space for you to perform. You know, everyone was very supportive of each other. And that's the same in the spoken word scene to this day, you know, regardless of what gig you're at. I think that you would struggle to find an event where the crowd and the other poets performing are disrespectful of you or make you feel as though you shouldn't be there. So yeah, the first few years I managed to develop my talent and progress and take on bigger and bigger gigs and bigger audiences without really this imposter syndrome feeling, because the spoken word society we have built, I feel, within itself doesn't really make you feel imposter syndrome. I'm sure there are people who can totally disagree with me, and please, if you are one of those people, get in touch. I know that spoken word poetry, it's all about taste, and what one person likes the other person doesn't like. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. So performing on stages and gigs really was my home from home for many years. And then I got the Poet Laureate position. Now, let's not forget, I was anxious to even apply for that because the title, Poet Laureate, sounds up here. And it is. It has completely changed my career, and I've had amazing opportunities and I've learned a lot. But achieving that step up from working poet, performing poet, gigging poet, teaching poet, to Poet Laureate, we have some sort of recognition. Then came my first real experience of imposter syndrome. And I think probably one of the best examples of this that I can give is a trip that I went on with Nottingham City of Literature, representing Nottingham as a UNESCO city. And I was in Granada in Spain amidst some incredibly lovely and clever and warm and welcoming people who also had very big prestigious titles. I was around Goodwill ambassadors, I was around the mayor, a lot of people who I wouldn't normally have come into contact with had I not taken on the Poet Laureate role. And we got invited to go to this big dinner where everyone was sat on this long table, and I was really nervous. I'm sure there are people watching this who feel that meals and like fancy dinners out are kind of anxiety inducing anyway. I'm definitely one of those people, just naturally, regardless of whatever situation I'm in. And also, I grew up in Arnold on the chip shop and McDonald's, from a family that grew up in Nottingham on the chip shop and, whatever else as well. So I'm a little bit of a sheltered eater, a fussy eater. And of course, beautiful food comes out onto this table, and it's all sort of tapas. So there was like 11 rounds of food to eat, and I'm thinking, I was sat at my seat with my beer and I'm looking up the table at all these big important people in the literary circle, and I was really nervous, and then the food comes out and my nerves went from here to here because it was like seafood, stuff that I don't normally eat, stuff that I'd never eaten before. So trying to stomach unfamiliar food and look like I know what I'm doing, alongside trying to contribute to any conversation I could find my way into, and battle the internal voice in your head that's second guessing everything you say, like, oh, that was really stupid, why did you just say that? Well, your mouth was still talking. You know, that was a real moment where I felt this imposter syndrome. And let's not forget, I'm 26, so when I was sat around this table, I just felt young. I felt my working class roots all of a sudden were very present and flustering up in me. You know, I was going, what bloody hell are you doing on this table? You don't know how to eat whatever it was that you can't even pronounce. How do you know what that person says is any different to what you say? Your opinion's different to theirs, but how do you know? Right? So it was a tense experience. However, I sat there and I tried to eat everything. Anything I didn't like, I gulped down with a beer, and I was just present. So I think what I really want to say about imposter syndrome is keep being present, because you can't let it stop what you're doing, and just try. And if you're nervous, don't try and mask that nervousness with bravado or whatever else. Just be nervous, just be a human, you know, have a joke, just try and push yourself through. I know it's easier said than done, but you gotta just go for it. Although there is something I want to share with you that I've learned about myself, and it's that when I'm invited to these events that other very literary or very kind of prestigious people are also invited to, yes, I'm terrified, but once I have performed and shared my work, that imposter syndrome seems to slip away from me a little bit, and I feel like I've earned my place at the table because I've gone up to that stage and I've done my absolute best and I've given it all of my energy, and suddenly I don't feel like this mousy little thing that people's thinking, what's she doing here? A little bit of that imposter syndrome for me is wanting to find a platform to be able to go, wait, look, I do belong here, let me share my art form. And I'd be really interested to know if anybody else feels that way or tackles things that way. Something else I want to briefly touch on. Thank you again to Debs for asking this question about imposter syndrome, because it provides such rich discussion. I wish I had like 10 of you here to talk to. I mentioned working class roots, right? I have realised since I left A-levels and went on to university, I have been hard pressed to find somebody else that I felt I could identify with and was the same as me. And I have learned that a huge pillar of my character is making a laugh and a joke about being a bit rough and ready and from Arnold. Now that is because I am really not surrounded by other people my age, female, from a background that's not literary. I was the first of my family to go to university and not have kids, husband, life happening around them in that way. And you know, at uni, the people I was friends with just happened to have lifestyles very different to mine. I went to the University of Nottingham, which attracts perhaps stereotypically people from a different background, and then I graduated and I went straight into the job that we've spoken about, working in learning design and with big corporate organisations, like huge global organisations. And of course I was just looking around me and not seeing people who had my references, and I've realised that part of coping with that imposter syndrome is making these jokes, is turning childhood trauma, or even to an extent just childhood experiences, into a kind of puppet show. So I think, to summarise, the way that I deal with imposter syndrome as a creative is get up and do stuff anyway and try and drown that voice out of your head. And I think that is the only advice, that is the only thing to do. But some things I have learned about myself is that I don't feel okay in these more prestigious circles until I have performed and showed my colours, and I will turn my past into a bit of a caricature as potentially a defence mechanism. There's so much to be said about that. If anybody else is out there that's watching this and thinks, oh, I have felt the same as that, please get in touch. Let's chat, because I think there's more to this topic than perhaps this vlog series will do justice for, and I'd really love to share some ideas around this. Please guys, comment on the video, tweet me, wherever you see this link shared, make sure that you leave a comment and get in touch if you feel feel like you want to add something to this discussion. Thank you very much for listening in. I hope sharing some of my experiences makes you feel like maybe you have somebody that you can relate to, or gives you an idea of the struggle that we all go through as creatives. I will see you in episode 5.